So David asked me about my experience in Vietnam, and uh, when I was going to medical school, uh, everybody had registered for the draft, and at that time, uh, uh, everybody that uh, was could walk would be brought into the U.S. Services, and uh, during your junior year, you could decide what branch of service you wanted to be in. So you could be in the Navy, the Army, or the Air Force. And at that time, the Vietnam War was at its height, and there were uh, lots of mortalities amongst the U.S. soldiers, and so I really didn't want to go to Vietnam. And at that time, the Army was, providing most of the manpower for Vietnam, and so I decided that I wanted to be in the Air Force. And then you had a choice of you could go in the Air Force right after you completed your internship. You could do a partial residency, I think 2 years as a resident and go in, or you could complete a residency and go in as a board certified specialist. And they limited the number of specialists that they wanted. So I signed up to go in the year after I finished my internship. And at that time, the war was winding down, and the Air Force would, the main people there were going to Vietnam because we were still bombing North Vietnam. And so I went to Vietnam, and I was stationed in Tan Son Nhut, which was in Saigon, which is now Ho Chi Minh City. But Saigon was a very cosmopolitan place. The French had been in Southeast Asia for probably 100 years, and so they had a lot of French kinds of thing. You could, when you went downtown, they had French bread hanging in these small vendors along the road, and it was you couldn't always go into Saigon because there was danger of Viet Cong, which were the guerrilla force in South Vietnam. And there could be danger in Saigon, but they'd open up periodically, and we could go downtown, and they had a lot of French cuisine, and at that particular time in the war, a lot of the ground fighting was actually being done by the South Koreans. And they had some Korean restaurants, and they were super. And they had Chinese restaurants, and they had Vietnamese restaurants, and so from a food standpoint, there were a lot of fun places you could go. As far as Tan Son Nhut goes, it was a Air Force base, and there were fighter bombers that flew out of Tan Son Nhut, and then there were big transport trains that there were planes that came in bringing in supplies from the U.S. I worked in a dispensary, and it was set up so we could go out, and if need be, we could handle casualties. But I was just an intern, and so we I've forgotten, we worked from like 7 in the morning till 6 at night, and it was we had we were young, and it kind of was like I'm blocking on the name of the TV program. The
MASH.
MASH. It was kind of that spirit of MASH. And we had a lot of venereal disease, and so we spent a lot of time treating soldiers that came in with those kind of problems. And we did have some cases of malaria, and some exotic things. It was interesting that in the mortalities that we had that came into the dispensary, they were all alcohol related. People would drown in a swimming pool, or you'd be drunk and they'd fall off some steps and they might rupture a spleen. But nobody got shot in my medical career. We had a major who could have been a character in MASH, but he was a partially trained surgeon, and he was really gun-ho. He'd carry his M16 rifle into the movie theater.
Oh, wow.
And they were real characters. At that time, they started to be concerned about drug use in the military, and there was marijuana was commonly used, but they were lacing it with opium, and so part of what we had is called golden flow, but they had to produce urine specimens that would be screened for narcotics. And I guess heroin is better than opium, and what they laced it with. So we had to deal with drug addiction. It's kind of, it came back to the States. And nobody liked that, but that was just part of what we were supposed to do.
Right.
And we used to go out on, we call them med cabs, but we'd fly out to these little villages and look at patients, and we'd give immunizations to the kids, and a lot of them had viral illnesses, and we really couldn't do a lot for many of these sick people, but it was kind of a goodwill thing. And one of these adventures, we flew in by helicopter, and it was like the helicopters. They had it was a gunship. They had machine guns coming off each side, and we came into this area, and then we went by a canal on boat, and they had these big 80 horse motors that seemed big at the time. We go zooming down the canal, and the canal was about 10 feet down from the level of the land. And I just, I thought, Lord, you're just a sitting duck. If you, we came to this little community, and we saw the people, and then they said, well, why don't you stay and we'll give you lunch. So they had a meal. I don't remember exactly what it was, but the villagers were kind of snickering. And then we got done, and then they told us the meat was dog.
Oh my gosh.
So you never really knew, what the political leanings were in these villages, and this was out in the Mekong Delta. But those were great experiences, and you'd eat everything. I was never concerned about parasites or. So I was there in Vietnam for I don't know, a year and a few days, but at that time everybody had to stay a year, and people would count the days that they were there, and then you'd cycle out of the area that you're working. And
so what year was that?
So I went to Vietnam in 71, 72.
Okay.
And Rita and I got married on my R&R. You had 2 weeks that you could take off, and you could go to Hawaii, Hong Kong, or Australia. And we decided that we would meet in Hawaii and get married. So we didn't have any family. We just got married in a church on Hickam Air Force Base, which was in Oahu. And then I stayed 2 weeks, and we went to the Big Island, Hawaii, and then we went to Kauai, and never went back.
Why didn't you guys go back?
Well, we weren't real big sun people, and it was expensive, and as we when it came out to Washington State, we got interested in the mountains, and there were a lot of places that we'd rather go than a expensive place. At the time that we were there, the Japanese were the powerhouse in the East, and so they were buying up a lot of the property in Hawaii. And we loved Hawaii. There was great food, and but we were there 2 weeks, so we got to see quite a bit.
Right.
And the only night when I was in Vietnam that the base got rockets, I happened to be on call, and I was sleeping in the on-call room, and we had a big water, what do they call them? Anyway, it was air conditioner, I've forgotten the term, but anyway, it was a big noisy thing, and I never heard the rocket. They didn't hit anything seriously. They were kind of going for the airplanes and runway and that sort of stuff. Um, the It was kind of interesting. We traveled around. We went to the army base, and there was non-commissioned officer area that used to be for dancing and food, and they had a big chandelier with tiny little mirrors on it that kind of circled around, and you could see that it was a kind of designed for a drug a drug exposure. And originally, or early in the Vietnam War, they really didn't discourage drug use, and most people thought it was marijuana, but when they started lacing it with heroin, then it became clear that it was a bigger problem, and that's how the Golden Flow operation started. And that drug use, it was in the U.S. Even before the war, but I think that just added to the drug culture that developed in the United States. It was interesting. I really liked the military. The people that were in the career people were in general very, they were very patriotic, and they were proud of what they did. And then the people back in the U.S. didn't really appreciate the military. When you came back, none of this thank you for serving. Never heard that from anybody. And so the Vietnam War it wasn't a popular war, and it left a lot of scars for people that had been in the military service. I guess I'll tell you another story. Always in these war zones, there are characters, and one of the things that I was fortunate enough to have, they had an alternative command center, and it was run by the engineers, and they like to have a dock in their housing. And when I originally got to Vietnam, I had a little cubicle with a fan and a cot, and the guy that was leaving the engineering command post said, "Well, would you like to live with them?" And so I said, "Sure." So it was an air conditioned, had a kitchen, and we had a sort of a group area. There was a bar, and there were two the women that the Vietnamese women, we call them mamazons. Well, we had two mamazons that sort of cleaned up the command center, and so they made your beds, and so it was a very deluxe place. But one of the guys that stayed there was a captain. I don't know. He was an old captain. They hadn't promoted him to major, but he used to fly around the countryside, and the what's the name? The U.S. Diplomat in Vietnam would fly to Nepal, and his wife, I think, was stationed there, and so he'd fly out with them, and then he'd bring all kinds of stuff back. He was a wheeler dealer, but he was associated with the CIA, and he had a friend that worked for Air America, and I really didn't know what Air America was, but it was a clandestine CIA program where they would try to support some of the locals out fighting the Viet Cong, and they could drop bombs from their planes, and he got me to go up in one of these. It was a prop plane. I can't remember what it was, but the guy was trying to make me sick, so he was doing all kinds of stunts, and it didn't really bother me. But this guy, these two guys, the Air America guy and this captain, we go downtown, and there was a big motel down there. It seems like it was called the Continental, but it had a big open eating area, and it was open to everybody. So the locals, and it was a very cosmopolitan place. It could be French and all kinds of different people there. But he was telling me, well, there's probably some spies sitting here trying to listen to see, if we had any information that they could pass on to the bad boys. But it's kind of a Casablanca kind of experience. So those are some of the memories I have of Vietnam. So I had it was really a great experience, but you really, in a war zone, you just learn to appreciate the folks that are there, and there is a little bit more free flying in that kind of environment. But if you're a young man, it was an exciting place to be.
Yeah, I imagine.